My designation was Cadet Xylo, 3rd Clutch of the Vexian Protectorate. I was, by all measures, a competent trainee. My reflexes were within the 97th percentile, my strategic acumen rated highly, and my adherence to command structure was exemplary. I was not, however, the best. That honor belonged to cadets like Jorik, whose frill muscles were thick enough to repel a stun blast, or Lyra, whose mind could process tactical overlays faster than the simulators could render them. I was destined for a solid, if unremarkable, career as a mid-rank officer on a perimeter patrol vessel. It was a future I had accepted with the quiet resignation my clutch was known for. Then came the summons. It wasn't a general call or a commendation ceremony. It was a single, encrypted directive that appeared on my personal data slate, bypassing my immediate cohort leader and originating from the highest echelons of the Command Acuity Division. The directive was 2 words: report, Level 0. Level 0 didn't officially exist. It was a whisper in the training halls, a myth used to frighten first clutch cadets. It was the sterile, silent core of the moon-sized training citadel we called the Crucible, a place where the rules of physics and protocol were said to be mere suggestions. My respiratory vents constricted with a nervous hiss. I found my way to the designated coordinates, a featureless panel of chromasteel that irised open without a seam upon recognizing my biometric signature. The corridor beyond was not metal, but a milky, glowing substance that absorbed all sound. My footsteps, usually a series of sharp clicks from my 3-jointed legs, were silenced. It felt like walking through a dream. At the end of the hall stood Elder Kalen, a figure so severe and ancient he seemed carved from granite. His own frill, a crown of cartilage and finely controlled muscle that communicated all Vexian emotion, was utterly still. In our culture, such stillness was either a sign of supreme discipline or profound shock. With Kalen, it was impossible to tell. "Cadet Xylo," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in my bones. He did not offer a greeting or a pleasantry. "Elder Kalen." I was summoned. I managed, my own frill attempting a respectful flattening that felt clumsy in the face of his immense composure. "You were selected," he corrected, his multifaceted eyes, black as polished obsidian, giving away nothing. "There are 4 others. You will undergo a series of qualification trials. Succeed, and you will be given a new assignment of unprecedented importance. Fail, and you will be reassigned to a sanitation detail on the slag moons of Cygnus X1. Your record will be wiped. You will have never been here." A cold dread, heavier than any training simulation, settled in my gut. Sanitation detail was not just a demotion, it was an erasure. "Elder, what is the nature of this assignment? What are the trials intended to qualify us for?" For the first time, a flicker of something moved across Kalen's face. It was not irritation, but a deep, weary patience, as if he had answered this question 1,000 times and knew the answer was always insufficient. "The nature of the trials is to be endured. The purpose is to be discovered. That is all the information you require. Your questions are irrelevant. Your obedience is mandatory. Follow." He turned and strode down the luminous corridor, his silence a wall I could not breach. I followed, the dream turning into a nightmare. We entered a stark white chamber where 4 other cadets already stood, shifting their weight with the same nervous energy I felt. I recognized Jorik and Lyra. The other 2 were from different divisions, their frills displaying the subtle color variations of their lineages. We were all top performers, but an odd selection. Jorik was a brute, Lyra a genius. I was balanced. What single role could possibly require such a disparate set of skills? Kalen brought us to attention with a single, sharp gesture. "Your first trial will begin shortly. You will enter the chamber, one at a time. You will follow the instructions displayed within. You will not speak. You will not ask for clarification. You will only perform. Jorik, you are first." Jorik, ever confident, straightened his broad shoulders and marched into the chamber that opened before him. The door hissed shut, leaving the 4 of us in a tense, echoing silence. We waited. Minutes stretched into an eternity. We heard nothing. Then the door opened. Jorik stumbled out, his face pale, the powerful muscles of his frill twitching uncontrollably. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by a shaken, bewildered look. He stared at his own hands as if he'd never seen them before and was led away by a silent attendant without a word. One by one, the others went in and came out similarly undone. Lyra, the brilliant strategist, emerged with a vacant expression, her gaze unfocused. She was muttering about patterns that weren't there. When my turn came, my heart analogs were hammering against my ribs. I had no idea what to expect, only that it had broken the strongest and the smartest among us. Cadet Xylo, Kalen's voice was flat, devoid of encouragement. Enter. I took a deep, shuddering breath through my vents and stepped across the threshold. The door hissed shut behind me, sealing me in absolute white silence. The room was a perfect cube, seamless and bare, save for a single, unadorned black chair in the exact center, and opposite it, a small, dark plinth. A single line of text glowed in the air before me. Sit, observe, do not look away. It seemed absurdly simple. A trick. I walked to the chair, its material cool and unyielding against my carapace. As I sat, the plinth opposite me shimmered. A figure resolved itself out of the light, a humanoid projection of remarkable fidelity. It was seated in a posture similar to my own. It had 2 arms, 2 legs, a torso, a head. Its skin was a pale, pinkish tan, its head covered in a shock of dark, fibrous growth. But its eyes were the color of a summer sky, and they were fixed on mine. And they did not blink. The trial began. I stared into those 2 blue orbs. At first it was easy. I was a Vexian cadet. Discipline was my core programming. I controlled my breathing, stilled my limbs, and met the projection's gaze. 1 minute passed, then 2. The projection was utterly motionless, a perfect statue. The only sign it was a projection at all was the faint, almost subliminal hum that filled the room. After 10 minutes, the strangeness began to set in. My own eyes, accustomed to blinking every few seconds to moisten and clear them, began to burn. I had to fight the reflex, a biological imperative screaming at me. I focused harder, channeling my discipline. The projection stare was not aggressive. It was not hateful or challenging. It was neutral, a blank, unyielding, absolute focus. And that was what made it so unnerving. It was the gaze of something that had no need to look away, ever. At 20 minutes, my frill muscles began to ache. The frill is a Vexian's primary social tool. It rises in aggression, flattens in submission, ripples with curiosity, trembles with fear. To hold it perfectly still under such a focused gaze was like trying to hold a live wire. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to react, to display a challenge crest, to lower my gaze in a gesture of non-aggression, to do something to break the unbearable tension. The trial, I realized, wasn't just about not looking away. It was about suppressing every fiber of my social being. What is the point of this? My mind screamed. Is it a test of willpower? A pathetic staring contest against a machine? The irritation began to bubble up, a hot, acidic feeling in my chest. This was pointless. It was a demeaning, idiotic exercise designed by minds with too much time and a sadistic streak. The anger helped for a moment. It gave me something to focus on besides the growing fire in my eyes and the deep, throbbing agony in the muscles around my head. At 40 minutes, the projection changed. Or rather, it didn't, and that was the change. My mind, starved for stimulus, began to project intent onto the blank face. I saw a flicker of contempt in the corner of its mouth, a flash of mockery in the depth of its blue eyes. The neutrality itself became an act of profound psychological aggression. It wasn't just looking at me. It was judging me, finding me wanting, and it was so confident in its assessment that it didn't even need to move a muscle. My paranoia spiraled. Was it reading my mind? Cataloging my weaknesses, the pain in my frill was now a blinding, white-hot agony. The muscles, held rigid for so long, were cramping violently. They felt like they were tearing away from the cartilage. My vision swam. The blue eyes of the projection dilated and contracted, not because they were moving, but because my own pupils were failing. I was on the verge of breaking. I could feel the sanity, the discipline, the very sense of self I had built over years of training beginning to fray, and still it stared. Unblinking, unwavering. An absolute, immovable object of pure observation. I don't know how long I sat there. An hour, 2. Time had dissolved into a smear of pain and paranoia. I had detached from my body, focusing on a single point of light in the projection's left eye, clinging to it as a drowning sailor clings to wreckage. My frill was a crown of fire. My eyes felt like they had been scraped raw with sand. My mind was a hollowed-out cavern where echoes of my own angry thoughts chased each other into oblivion. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the projection vanished. The plinth went dark, the hum ceased, the text in the air changed. Trial 1 complete. Proceed to the antechamber for recovery. A door I hadn't noticed irised opened to my left. I tried to stand, but my legs wouldn't obey. I collapsed onto the floor, my whole body trembling. My frill spasmed, a wild, uncontrolled series of ripples and flares that sent shards of pain through my skull. I crawled, dragging myself across the smooth, white floor like a wounded insect, every inch in agony. When I finally tumbled into the antechamber, a medical drone was already hovering, extending a thin probe that administered a fast-acting muscle relaxant. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. The fire in my frill subsided to a dull, throbbing ache, but the psychological damage was done. I felt violated, scoured. I had faced down a mindless string of photons and it had nearly unmade me. As the drone tended to me, I looked at my own trembling hands and saw not a competent cadet, but a fragile creature who had been pushed to the brink by a simple, unblinking stare. The trial made no sense. It was pure, calculated sadism. And it was only the first. After a mandated rest period of exactly 20 minutes, during which my body was rehydrated and my muscles soothed by the drone, I was directed to the next trial chamber. There was no sign of the other candidates. I was alone in this sterile labyrinth. The door slid open to reveal a vast, circular room. The floor was marked with concentric circles and grid lines, and the air had a strange, metallic tang. In the center of the ceiling, a massive, complex device hummed with latent power, a gravity generator, and a top-of-the-line one at that. A new line of text appeared, floating in the center of the room. A consistent sprint on the DESIGNATED path. Do not stop, do not falter. A glowing green line appeared on the floor, indicating a wide circular track. It seemed straightforward enough. I was a Vexian. My people evolved on a world with 1.2 times the standard gravitational pull. Endurance was bred into our very bones. My three-jointed legs were marvels of biological engineering, capable of incredible bursts of speed and sustained, loping runs that could cover vast distances. This, at least, was a test I could understand. A physical trial, a welcome relief after the psychological torment of the stare. I stretched my limbs, the lingering ache in my frill a dull reminder of the previous ordeal. I took my position on the glowing line, and as if sensing my readiness, a sharp tone echoed through the chamber. The trial had begun. I broke into a run, my pace steady and controlled. The floor was a composite material that offered excellent traction. The air was cool and recycled. For the first few laps, it was almost pleasant. I fell into the familiar rhythm of the run, my 3 heart analogues pumping in a steady, powerful beat, my respiratory vents drawing in air with efficient hisses. I could do this all day. My confidence, so thoroughly shattered in the first trial, began to mend itself. This was my element, pure physical exertion. Then, without warning, the gravity doubled. The sensation was instantaneous and brutal. One moment I was sprinting, light and fast. The next I weighed twice as much. My forward momentum slammed me down toward the floor with crushing force. My leg joints, evolved for high gravity but not for such a sudden, violent shift, screamed in protest. I stumbled, my form breaking, my arms pinwheeling as I fought to stay upright. The order was do not falter. A fall would surely constitute a failure. With a surge of adrenaline, I managed to catch myself, my movements becoming a clumsy, lumbering parody of a run. Each step was a monumental effort. Lifting my feet felt like trying to pull them from thick, viscous mud. My entire body screamed under the strain. My carapace, normally a lightweight shield, felt like a leaden shell. The gravity generator above whined with a higher pitch. Just as I began to adapt to the crushing weight, finding a new, plodding rhythm, it vanished. The gravity snapped back to normal. The sudden lightness was just as disorienting as the increase. I felt myself spring uncontrollably into the air with my next step, my stride becoming a bizarre, bounding leap. I overcompensated, nearly sprawling onto the track. It was a vicious, calculated cycle of disruption. They weren't testing my endurance. They were testing my ability to adapt to pure, unpredictable physical chaos. My frustration returned, hotter than before. This wasn't a fair test. There was no pattern to the shifts. Sometimes the gravity would surge to 2.5, even 3 times normal, holding me pinned to the floor with an invisible, giant's hand. The pressure on my internal organs was immense. My vents strained to pull in enough oxygen. Black spots danced in my vision. Then it would drop to near zero, and I would have to fight to keep from floating off the track entirely, using my hands to claw my way back to the glowing line. The laps blurred together into a continuous cycle of pain and disorientation. My joints felt like they were being ground into powder. My muscles, pushed past every conceivable limit, burned with acidic fire. Sweat, a thin, silvery mucus for my species, slicked my carapace and dripped into my eyes. My pride was a distant memory. This was no longer about excellence or technique. It was about survival. I lost track of time. My thoughts devolved into a simple, desperate mantra: left, right, breathe. The glowing line was my only reality. The unpredictable shifts in gravity were my personal tormentors. I began to hate the room, the silent watchers I imagined behind the walls, the entire insane, pointless system that had brought me here. What possible assignment could require a being to withstand this kind of arbitrary physical punishment? Were they training us to be couriers on a planet with a violently unstable core? It was insane. At one point, under a particularly savage triple gravity surge, my middle leg buckled. Pain, sharp and blinding, shot up my entire side. I cried out, a strangled gasp of air and agony. I was going down. Failure was imminent. The slag moons of Cygnus X1 flashed in my mind. Erasure. But then I thought of Jorek's bewildered face and Lyra's vacant eyes. They had broken them. They were trying to break me. And a deep, stubborn, almost suicidal defiance took root in my exhausted mind. I would not give them the satisfaction. I would not be broken. Roaring, I forced my leg to straighten. The sound that came from my vocalizer was not the disciplined bark of a cadet, but the raw, desperate scream of an animal. I pushed through the pain, each step a fresh wave of agony. I ran on pure, spiteful will. My body was a shattered vessel, but my spirit, fueled by rage, refused to yield. The shifts continued, merciless and random. I stumbled again and again, but I never fell. I learned to anticipate the feeling of the shift a split second before it happened. A subtle change in the generator's hum, a faint ionization of the air. It wasn't enough to prepare, but it was enough to brace. I ran bent low to the ground during the light phases and threw my body forward with every ounce of strength during the heavy ones. I was no longer a cadet performing a drill. I was a creature adapting to a hostile environment in real time. Then, as before, it simply stopped. The gravity settled to standard. The glowing line faded. The sharp tone echoed again, signaling the end. The text appeared once more. Trial 2 complete. Proceed to the antechamber for recovery. I didn't even try to walk. I collapsed onto the track, my body a heap of twitching, agonized muscle. My limbs refused to obey any command from my brain. My vents heaved, desperately trying to purge the toxins of extreme exertion. This time, 2 medical drones descended, their ministrations more intense. They injected me with a powerful anti-inflammatory and a nutrient solution that felt like ice water spreading through my veins. As they worked, I stared up at the silent gravity generator. The trial had been more than a physical test. It had been designed to strip away everything: technique, training, even hope, until only raw, stubborn persistence remained. It was a trial of endurance, yes, but it was an endurance of the spirit as much as the body. I had passed, but the cost was a body that felt flayed, and a mind that was growing increasingly suspicious and resentful of the entire process. What in the cosmos could be waiting at the end of this that justified such cruelty? The third trial chamber was smaller, a simple cube of dark, non-reflective metal. The air was cold, carrying the sterile scent of ozone and chilled alloy. In the center of the room, a single, smooth, cylindrical bar of the same dark metal jutted from the floor to about chest height. It was featureless, with no grip, no texture, nothing but a perfect, polished surface. The floating text was by now a familiar and unwelcome sight. Grasp the bar. Hold. Do not let go. My hand analogs, three-fingered and double-thumbed for dexterity and strength, flexed nervously. My joints, particularly in my arms and shoulders, still throbbed with a deep, resonant ache from the endurance run. The medical drones had healed the damage, but the memory of the strain remained. This looked like a test of simple strength. After the last two trials, I knew it would be anything but simple. I approached the bar. It was cold to the touch, the metal leaching warmth from my skin instantly. It felt unnaturally dense, solid to the core. I took a deep breath, centered myself, and wrapped both my hands around it. My grip was firm, my stance balanced. I was ready for a full minute. Nothing happened. I stood there holding a cold metal pole. The silence was absolute. I tightened my grip, anticipating a trick. Was this another psychological test, a trial of patience? Was it going to electrify? Release a gas? My mind raced through 100 tactical possibilities, my training kicking in. Then the bar moved. It wasn't a violent jerk. It was a smooth, silent, impossibly powerful pull, straight down into the floor. It was like trying to hold onto a sinking weight of immense mass. My arms were yanked taut, my shoulders straining in their sockets. I locked my elbows, dug my feet into the floor, and held on, my muscles quivering with the effort. The pull was immense, far more than my own body weight. It was a test of pure, static strength. Slowly, the downward pressure eased, and for a moment the bar was still. I allowed myself a half-second to readjust my grip, to shift my weight. It was a mistake. The bar twisted, a sudden, violent torque that threatened to snap my wrists. I cried out as a searing pain shot up my forearms. I had to let my body rotate with the force, my feet scrambling to keep up, turning a full circle before the twisting stopped. This was the nature of the trial. It was not one force, but a dozen, all applied with brutal, overwhelming power and without any pattern. It would pull down, then thrust up, threatening to throw me into the ceiling. It would twist clockwise, then counterclockwise with bone-jarring force. It would vibrate at a frequency so high it made my teeth ache and my vision blur, trying to shake my grip loose through sheer resonance. My Vexian pride, what was left of it, hinged on my strength. We were not the most intelligent species, nor the most agile, but we were strong, built to wrestle with the harsh realities of our high-gravity homeworld. To be bested by a simple metal bar was a deep, personal insult. My pride burned hotter than my screaming muscles. I would not let go. The resistance doubled. I could feel it, a step change in the power output. The pull was now so strong it lifted my feet from the floor. I was hanging by my hands, my entire body a dead weight the machine was trying to shake loose. The smooth, cold surface of the bar was my enemy. There was nothing to hold onto, no purchase to be gained. It was a battle of friction and raw, crushing power. The joints in my fingers felt like they were being pulled apart. The cartilage in my shoulders shrieked. Pointless. I roared into the silent room, the sound swallowed by the non-reflective walls. This is a brute's game. It proves nothing. Nothing but the ability to endure. Outburst did nothing. The machine was indifferent. It was not an opponent to be intimidated. It was a force of nature, a localized physical law designed for the sole purpose of ripping my hands from this bar. My wounded pride was a useless fuel. My anger was a pointless gesture. All that mattered was the grip. The force doubled again. The pain was no longer a signal. It was my entire reality. It was a white-hot nova that exploded in my hands and sent shockwaves through every nerve in my body. My vision went gray at the edges. I could hear the grinding of bone in my own shoulder sockets. I knew, with a cold certainty, that I was causing permanent damage. Ligaments were tearing. Microfractures were spiderwebbing through my finger bones. But the command was absolute. Do not let go, my mind detached. It floated above the pain, a distant observer watching a body being tortured. Why? The question beat against my skull like a trapped bird. Why this specific trial? Why test grip strength to the point of self-destruction? It was beyond excessive. It was nihilistic. It was a trial designed by a madman. Was our mysterious future assignment to hang from the hull of a starship during atmospheric re-entry? The absurdity of it all was almost enough to make me laugh, but I didn't have the air. I was failing. My fingers were slick with my own silvery sweat. My left hand, my weaker one, began to slip. One finger uncurled, then another. The entire strain was now on my right hand and the remaining fingers of my left. I was moments from the end. The slag moons awaited, and in that moment of absolute failure something shifted. I stopped fighting the force. I stopped trying to overpower it. Instead, I yielded. I let my body go limp, becoming a pendulum, channeling the violent, twisting motions instead of resisting them. I focused all my remaining energy, all my will, into a single, desperate concept: fusion. My hands were no longer holding the bar. They were the bar. My fingers were clamps of forged metal. My will was a molecular bond. The bar gave one final, titanic shudder, a vibration so intense it felt like it was trying to atomize me. I held. I held through the agony, through the despair, through the complete and utter collapse of my physical strength. I held on with the ghost of my will, and then it went slack. The power cut out. The bar was just a cold, inert piece of metal again. My hands, unable to process the command to release, remained frozen in a claw-like grip. I had to pry them off, one finger at a time, my own movements alien and clumsy. They were mangled, swollen, and bruised a deep violet. I couldn't feel the tips of them. I stumbled back and fell against the wall, cradling my ruined hands to my chest. I had done it. I had passed. But as I looked at the damage, at the price I had paid to hold onto a metal pole, I felt no victory. Only a profound, hollow emptiness. I felt like a tool that had been used, tested to its breaking point, and was now ready to be discarded. The familiar text appeared. Trial 3 complete. Proceed to the antechamber for recovery. This recovery was the longest yet. The medical drones injected me with nanites that swarmed into my hands, rebuilding torn ligaments and sealing microfractures with painful, electric speed. The process was excruciating but effective. By the end of the hour-long mandated rest, my hands were functional again, though they still felt tender and alien. 3 trials down. 3 layers of my being, psychological, physical, and sheer brute force, stripped away, examined, and found adequate. I dreaded what came next. What was left to test? The 4th chamber was different from the others. It was not a sterile, empty space. It was a mock-up of a starship's command deck, complete with control consoles, holographic displays, and a large viewport showing a swirling, star-dusted nebula. Everything was dark and silent. It felt dead. I stepped into the center of the room, my senses on high alert. This was a tactical simulation, my territory. After the brutal physicality of the last 2 trials, a mental challenge was almost a relief. I scanned the consoles, trying to determine the ship's class, its systems, its status. But all the screens were blank, the controls inert. The text appeared, not in the center of the room, but on the main viewport, stark against the backdrop of the nebula. Stabilize the environment. Maintain operational calm. Before I could even process the command, the universe exploded. A klaxon began to blare, a deafening, discordant shriek that bypassed my auditory senses and seemed to drill directly into my brain. Red alert lights flashed, plunging the room into a strobing, crimson hell. The floor began to shake, a violent, bone-jarring shudder that threw me off balance. It wasn't a gentle rumble. It was the catastrophic vibration of a ship being torn apart. On the main screen, the serene nebula was replaced with a chaotic swirl of weapon fire and debris. Consoles that had been dark suddenly sprang to life, but they were filled with scrolling, incomprehensible text in a dozen different alien languages. None of it was Vexian. None of it was even in a recognizable galactic standard script. It was pure, meaningless data, a waterfall of garbage information. Then came the voices. A cacophony of panicked shouts erupted from hidden speakers around the room. They were like the text, dozens of different languages, all overlapping, all screaming. Hull breach on Deck 7. Warp core integrity failing. We're venting atmosphere. The words were meaningless to me, but the terror in the voices was universal. Objects began to fall from the ceiling. Not real debris, I quickly realized, but hard light projections that still had enough substance to deliver a painful blow. Sparks rained down from simulated ruptured conduits. The temperature fluctuated wildly, from freezing cold to searing heat. The air filled with a thick, acrid simulated smoke that made my vents burn. This was the chaos drill. My training kicked in instantly. I lunged for the nearest console. Stabilize the environment. That was the goal. I had to find the environmental controls, reroute power, seal the breaches, vent the smoke. But the console was dead to my touch. The buttons didn't work. The touch screen didn't respond. I scrambled to another console, then another. They were all the same. They were props. They did nothing. The chaos intensified. The shaking grew worse. The sirens pitched higher. The babble of panicked voices became a solid wall of sound. My mind, trained to find patterns, to assess threats, to create order, was being overwhelmed. There was too much stimulus, too much data, all of it contradictory and useless. I couldn't think. I couldn't focus. Panic, cold and sharp, began to creep in. This was a test designed for failure. They had put me in a broken simulator and given me an impossible task. The point wasn't to succeed, it was to watch me break. It was the ultimate sadistic expression of the trials. They wanted to see me run around, frantic and useless, until I collapsed into a gibbering wreck. My frustration, my anger, my pain from all the previous trials coalesced into a single, explosive point of rage. I slammed my fist onto a console, the impact doing nothing to the inert panel but sending a fresh spike of pain through my newly repaired hand. I screamed my fury at the uncaring room, my voice lost in the cacophony. And in the silence that followed my own scream, a silence that only existed inside my head, I finally understood. I had been trying to fight the chaos. I had been trying to impose order on a system designed to be disorderly, but the command wasn't fix the ship. It was stabilize the environment, maintain operational calm. The environment wasn't the ship. It was me. They weren't testing my ability to solve the problem. They were testing my ability to endure the problem, to exist within a state of absolute, unsolvable chaos without breaking. It was the first trial and the second trial and the third trial all rolled into one, but this time the assault was purely sensory, purely mental. I stopped. I stood in the very center of the bridge on the commander's mark. I ignored the falling debris, the flashing lights, the screaming voices. I closed my eyes. The noise was still there, the shaking was still there, but I pushed it to the background. I focused on the one thing in this entire universe I could control, my own breathing, in, out, a slow, steady rhythm. I forced my 3 heart analogs to fall into sync with my breath, to stop their panicked hammering. I forced my frill muscles, which were flaring wildly with stress, to go slack. I let the shaking of the floor move through my body, not fighting it, but swaying with it like a reed in the wind. I let the noise wash over me, a meaningless tide of sound, maintain operational calm. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Every instinct screamed at me to do something, to solve, to fight, to flee. But I stood my ground, an island of stillness in a sea of pandemonium. I built a fortress inside my own mind, and I waited. My focus narrowed to a single point of internal silence. The chaos was a storm, and I was the eye. I don't know how long I stood there. It could have been minutes or hours. In the timeless, internal space I had created, it didn't matter. I simply was. And then, as abruptly as it began, it all stopped. The sirens cut out, the shaking ceased. The lights returned to a steady, neutral white. The voices vanished. The smoke cleared. The consoles went dark. The chamber was once again just a silent mock-up of a command deck. The silence was so profound, it was almost as deafening as the noise had been. I opened my eyes. I was drenched in sweat. My body ached with a deep, resonant tension from holding itself in a state of controlled relaxation. But my mind was clear, sharper than it had ever been. I had faced the void and I had not blinked. The text on the main screen changed one last time. All trials complete. The Elder awaits you. The main door slid open, revealing the long, sound-dampening corridor from which I had started this journey what felt like a lifetime ago. Standing there was Elder Kalen. His severe face was unchanged, his frill perfectly still. But as I walked toward him out of the chamber of chaos, I saw something new in his ancient, obsidian eyes. It was not praise. It was not warmth. It was recognition. He was looking at me as if for the first time. "You have passed, Xylo," he said, his voice the same low rumble. But the words themselves were a seismic event. He had never offered a single word of encouragement or feedback before. "What was the purpose, Elder?" I asked, my voice hoarse. I needed to know. After everything I had endured, I had earned at least that. Why were we subjected to that? The stare, the gravity, the strain, the chaos. What is the assignment? Kalen regarded me for a long moment. The trials were not a test of skill, cadet. They were a filter, a calibration. We were not testing what you could do. We were testing what you could withstand. The assignment is not a mission. It is an encounter. He gestured for me to walk with him, turning away from the trial chambers and heading deeper into the silent heart of Level 0. The luminous walls seemed to brighten as we walked. The air grew warmer, losing its sterile, recycled quality and taking on a clean, organic scent I couldn't place. For generations, Kalen began, his voice taking on a rare, didactic tone, the Vexian Protectorate has expanded, encountering dozens of spacefaring species. We have protocols for every interaction. Diplomats for the philosophical, soldiers for the aggressive, scientists for the curious. We have categorized, analyzed, and understood every species we have met. Until now, came to a heavy door different from the others. It was made of a warm, yellow-toned metal, and it was not seamless. It had hinges and a handle. It was an archaic, almost primitive design. We made contact with a species from a small, unremarkable yellow star system. So all they call it. The species calls itself humanity. Our initial long-range scans were baffling. Their technology was a chaotic mix of primitive and hyper-advanced. Their society was a fractured, warring, and yet strangely cooperative mess. We could not get a clear reading, so we sent a delegation. Kalen paused, placing a hand on the door. The delegation was comprised of our best. Our most experienced diplomats, our most stable psychologists, our most formidable guards. The first meeting was cordial, and at the end of it our entire delegation resigned their commissions. They were not threatened. They were not harmed. They were overwhelmed. They reported a species of such profound, casual intensity that it shattered their composure. A species that had evolved in a crucible of violence and hardship that made our own history look like a peaceful meditation. They said we were not ready. That to interact with them was to invite a kind of psychic contagion, an intensity that would burn through our culture. My mind reeled. All of this for a diplomatic meeting. So we created this program, Kalen continued, his gaze distant. We analyzed the humans. We studied their biology, their environment, their psychology, and we designed the trials based on our findings. We designed a filter to find the 1 in a billion Vexian who might, be able to stand in a room with a human and not break. He pushed the door open. The room beyond was not a laboratory or a command center. It was a comfortable-looking lounge, filled with soft lighting and what looked like furniture. And sitting in a chair, holding a steaming mug, was a creature. A humanoid. Exactly like the projection from the first trial, it looked up as we entered. And its eyes, a warm shade of brown, met mine, and in that single, shattering moment everything clicked into place. The stare. The human's gaze was not hostile, it was not challenging. It was open, curious, and utterly, completely, unwavering. It was the unblinking, soul-scouring focus of a predator, an apex creature that had spent 1,000,000 years at the top of its food chain, a creature that had no biological reason to ever look away first. My frill muscles, healed but not forgetful, clenched so hard a spike of pain shot through my skull. I fought to keep them still, the muscle memory of the trial my only defense against a lifetime of instinct. The endurance. The human stood up, and it was not a large creature, no taller than myself. But it was dense. Its frame was solid, its movements economical and powerful. I could see the thick cording of muscle in its forearms, the solid trunk of its torso. It was a body built by and for a lifetime under a heavy, relentless, 1G pull of gravity. A body that could withstand the crushing forces of the second trial as its baseline state of existence. I suddenly felt fragile, my own high-G adaptations seeming like a flimsy parody. The grip. It smiled, a baring of its teeth that was somehow not a threat, and extended a hand. I looked at its 5-fingered hand, and my own throbbed with a phantom agony. I understood the grip trial now. Humans were tool users. Their hands were their primary interface with the universe. They were made for crushing, for holding, for never, ever letting go. The force the machine had exerted, the strain that had nearly crippled me, was a pale imitation of the latent, bone-breaking power held in that casual, friendly gesture. The chaos. The human's posture was utterly relaxed. It stood there in a sterile alien facility, light years from its home, facing two unknown beings, and it radiated an aura of perfect, unshakable calm. It was a creature born from chaos. Its history was war, plague, discovery, and disaster. Its daily life was a sensory overload of information and interaction. The wailing sirens, the shaking room, the cacophony of the fourth trial, that wasn't a simulation of a disaster for them. It was just Tuesday. They lived inside the storm. They were the storm, the human spoke. Its voice was a pleasant baritone, the sound strange and alien, yet the tone was one of simple greeting. A translator drone in the room rendered its words into Vexian. "Hello," it said. "It's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Alex, and I finally understood. The trials were not sadistic. They were an act of mercy. They were a vaccine. They were designed to give one Vexian a fractional, terrifying taste of what it was like to be human, because no unprepared mind could survive the full, unfiltered reality. I was not chosen to be a diplomat or a soldier. I was chosen because I was the only one who had survived the harrowing, brutal, and utterly necessary introduction to the most terrifyingly intense species the galaxy had ever known. And as I looked at the smiling, gentle, impossibly dangerous creature in front of me, I felt a new emotion, one that transcended fear and awe. I felt a profound and deeply unsettling sense of kinship.